let me just think like about what we were talking about before. You were talking about proper basicality, right? And so what I was saying is I don't understand for what it means to be rational, and let's just say rational in the epistemic sense, um, for people to have beliefs that are not inferentially arrived at, right? That that's the dialectic up to that point. And then you asked, well, what about in cases when people choose to be irrational, right? And I said, I rejected that, right, because I don't think that the choice is the type of epistemic rationality that I was talking about the first time, and it does presuppose some type of rationality, but that type of rationality is a sort of practical view of rationality, right?
Let me define the terms as I see them being used here. You could talk about rationality in the sense of rules of inference or laws of logic. These are principles of thought, right? They're normative standards to which
Right.
true thought ought to be conducted. Then there is rationality in the sense of a faculty of our existence. It is an innate ability to do something, namely to act in accord with those principles just mentioned. And then there is rationality in the sense of actually um, of an actual incurment of the process taken where we act in accord with those principles. So there's the principles, there's the ability to follow them, and then there is following them. But when you said rationality is the project of seeking inferential bases, and you were basically commenting, you're making an incredulity comment about Matt's foundationalism. What I find odd about that is, well, how is that standard self-consistent? What rational bases, excuse me, what rational basis is there of the inferential sort for thinking that claim itself? And then I don't understand the response about intentionality and agency, because that doesn't have to do with justification and
Well,
epistemology. That just has to do with
well,
agency.
you asked a question about decision making, right? And when you asked the question initially, when you said when you asked the question initially, you said something like, well, what's the inference that leads you to arrive at what rationality is based on inferences? That was the question. That was something like the question you initially asked, right? Am I characterizing that correctly?
Let me make sure I get this straight. So what I was saying is, I was asking you, what is the basis for the inference to the idea that rationality just is that process,
Right.
that
And so
an intention toward that process.
right. And so my response was that I didn't have an account for that. And then in response to that, you said, well, what about when people choose to be irrational?
Right.
And then I gave the answer. What I was talking about is I think in that instance there's an equivocation on rationality, right?
That equivocation being,
Well, the difference between practical rationality and epistemic rationality.
okay, but I don't think the distinction exists there. For if somebody is saying, I am going to believe that nothing exists, that has import both for epistemology as well as for the practice of life. So I don't know what distinction is being made there between practical rationality and epistemic rationality. The epistemic
Well,
irrationality of the person
let me
is something they
let
tend to
me
take on.
let me clarify it. Being practically irrational satisfies some desire. That's what it means to be practically rational, to act in a way that satisfies some desire, right? And epistemic rationality has to do with justifications. So you can have an instance of one, you actually have an instance of both, right? Let's say I want to believe that God exists, and it is in fact the case that God exists, and I want to have a good argument, right? And people start realizing that the more often people hit their head against trees, um, the more often they come up with justifications for belief in God that are good justifications. So in that sense, it would be practically rational for me to hit my head on a tree, right? But that doesn't mean that hitting my head on a tree is a good inference to the fact that God exists, right? It just satisfies some desire. So what I mean by practical rationality is that it satisfies some desire, right? And what I mean by epistemic rationality is consistent with the epistemic norms, right? Which I just take to
Excellent.
be,
Right. So, but what I'm saying is, it seems then that your behavior of thinking that this sort of rationality just is the project of seeking inferential bases actually devolves, or it reduces to the second kind, because you cannot give an account as to that statement itself. So it's
I don't
just a
see how
practical
that's,
rationale.
I don't see how that follows.
Well, by its very nature, if our standard is that uh,
Well,
we
can you
expect
outline the,
or seek.
I'm asking you to outline the reduction.
Right. So if you're intending to seek out justifications for belief, right, sufficient reason for a belief of the epistemic kind, that is, of the kind that comports to rules of inference, laws of logic, those types of things, these norms of reasoning. Um, but the only account you can give for holding that belief is your desire, then the whole system devolves to.
I didn't give an account. I told you that I didn't have an account.
But you do have desire to hold that, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so you hold that belief in accord with practical reason, but not in accord with uh, epistemic reason.
I don't think I'm holding the belief in accordance with some desire I have, right? I think I just happen to be in accord with that desire, right? But I don't think, and I mean, I assume that taking rational action, like let's say I wanted to know what the norms of rationality are, right? And then I would suppose I would have to go and read about what they typically are thought to be and stuff like that. Those would be practically rational actions, right? But it doesn't follow from that just because I have the desire that's what that me having that desire, that's the nature of those norms, right? The nature of those norms is going to be something like I mean, like I said, I don't know how to give an inference to those norms, right? I just assume those norms, the norms of epistemic rationality, as the basis of my inferences, right? And so that's what I understand the project of rationality to be. And if someone else wanted to say that they understand the project of rationality to be something different, I mean, that would be fine. We'd have to discuss whether or not it's a terminological dispute, whether or not they share some properties. But me not being able to give an epistemic account for my epistemology doesn't account against my epistemology.
It does if your standard is that rationality, in terms of epistemology at least, is just looking for justifications, but you're unwilling to look to have a justification, to provide a justification for that statement.
Well, like I don't understand. Like I'm just saying that if we start with an axiom, right? And then your inferences are justified on the basis of those of coherence with those axioms. That's what I take rationality to be, right? And so, in the instance of me, I take inference rules like modus ponens, double negation, conjunction elimination. I take those types of inferences to be non-inferentially arrived at, right? And I don't know anybody who does who wouldn't take those because I couldn't argue for them on the basis of those types of inferences, right? If I were to do that, that would argue in a circle, right? So I take them as the outset, as the skeletal structure of what rationality is, and then I operate with rationality within that confinement.
Well, I would agree with you that I don't think anyone has been successful in attempting to come up with inferential grounds for those. But my philosophy isn't that rationality is the search for inferential grounds. I don't think it's a problem for my epistemology, but if one's
I'm not
epistemology
saying
holds
it's. I'm
that.
not saying. I'm not saying rationality is the search for. Right. I'm saying my idea of what rationality is, the character of rationality, is to be in accord with these set of inference rules. Right. That's what I take rationality to be. That's my claim. I'm not saying it's rational to search for that or not rational to search for that, although I think, given agency, you're going to have to be beholden to some of those types of norms. And maybe I can give an argument to that, but I'm not really interested in getting into that, right? Because that's sort of irrelevant. But to the point is just that this is what I'm taking rationality to be, right? And it doesn't follow from that fact, the fact that it's irrational to have those beliefs, right? That it's not rational, right? It's not within the rules of inference, or I'm not providing inferences to those beliefs. It doesn't follow from that fact that I have a self-defeating worldview, right? It just follows from that's not a rational belief, right?
I mean, maybe we just disagree here, but if your system is defining rationality, that is the conception of being rational, is to comport uh, to those principles of reason, is to have an inferential basis for the belief given these certain axioms, but you can't give any basis for the axioms. The axioms themselves don't provide any basis. You just choose those because.
Well,
Then yes,
I don't, but what I'm saying, I rejected that they're chosen, right?
okay. Well, that seems to be that maybe the terminology you disagree with. Holding that those um, is in fact your axiom or your starting point, right? Holding to that, having that belief, the occurrence of that belief is irrational. And since all of your beliefs are inferentially based on those axioms, then yes, absolutely, your system implodes.
I mean, I don't
Well,
understand the.
wouldn't you want to make a distinction between what's irrational and irrational there? Like his beliefs would stem from an irrational basis, but I'm not sure how it follows that it's irrational in the sense that, given the criteria he's setting out for what counts as irrational, resulting in incoherence or other sorts of consequences. I'm not sure how it would follow from that um, holding to those axioms and not having a justification, presumably, for those axioms would be irrational as opposed to irrational.
Well, I'm taking as a given here that non-truth functional statements, belief in non-truth functional uh, statements, ideas, etc., are just in fact irrational. So to believe in something that is irrational just is irrational because belief in meaningless utterances is irrational.
How is what he's saying is not truth functional then? It's not a imperative or an interjection, I take it. It's some sort of proposition.
I think that it is truth functional, but I don't think that his system can account for its truth functionality. I think given his system, it isn't truth functional.
I guess I'm not following. Maybe you could spell that out?
Yeah, if one has a categorical reason, like so, for example, I'm a Christian theist. Uh, I believe that there is a categorical normativity to principles of reason provided by the commands of God, which ground that categorical normativity. That means that my decision or the occurrence of the belief, it doesn't really matter. Um, in beliefs which are inferred from those reasons or which comport to those reasons are in fact rational. But if one's system is simply that these axioms are arbitrary, that they are by caprice, that they are not
Well, I don't,
categorically
I don't know if he said that
normative.
they were arbitrary. I think he was just, I'm not sure if he made a comment on that. So you might want to clarify that before you make that chart.
Well, yeah, I think that I am. I mean, Josh can correct me, but I think that I am. I have sufficient reason to believe that it is arbitrary. Arbitrary for all uses of the word that's relevant to this conversation, anyways. We're talking about um, having rational beliefs. So arbitrary just means anytime that you have a belief which accrues because of a reason other than one that's sufficient for having that belief.
Well, I guess I'm interpreting that as meaning having a belief that isn't related to what conduces to the truth in some fashion. Or is that
Uh,
mistaken?
I would, I mean, that belief might be arbitrary, but the arbitrariness of a belief isn't its lack of correspondence or lack of conduciveness to truth. It has to do with the reason why the belief is held. It has to do with
Yeah,
justification,
that's
right?
what I was saying. That's what I was saying, which is that when it comes to the belief for factors that are irrelevant insofar as truth conduciveness is concerned. So
Oh, I missed that. The reason for the belief. Yes, yes, that's accurate.
like a historical contingency or where one grows up or other sorts of things.
Subjectivism is the objection, basically.
I guess I'm just not quite following what the problem is precisely. I mean, it just seems like either
Can
some
you
type of standard coherentist or maybe foundationalist, I mean, depending on how you want to characterize justification in relation to basicality. Um, which is just simply that, you start with some stock of beliefs, and the one comes, some stock of basic beliefs, and other beliefs are rational insofar as they're connected to the stock of basic beliefs by some process involving inference and other sorts of rules. And that's compatible with, say, one coming to later on change or alter what the stock of basic beliefs are. I mean, at least that's how I think most modest foundationalists think of it. They think basicality isn't the same thing as infallibility. Basic beliefs can be defeasible.
can you clarify exactly what you didn't understand about the argument?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what the argument is, so if you could maybe lay that out, then it might be the best way to
Yeah, I'm
proceed.
not sure I can do that any clearer than I already have, to be honest. I'm not a
Well, I mean, you said
I'm not a
something about it not being truth functional, which sounded surprising.
yeah. I mean, so the reason I don't I think that's the argument is that given that one's conception of rationality, again, in the sense that is relevant to um, the project of epistemology, right? If one is defining
Sorry, I lost
uh,
audio for since you began speaking. So if you could maybe start over, if that's all right.
yeah, no problem. Um, yeah, the charge is not brute that it's non-truth functional. The charge is that given that one's system relies on an irrational account, then all of the beliefs just implode given that account. Namely, if you have a system that defines rationality as having beliefs which are inferentially gained or based upon certain axioms, but those
Mm-hmm.
axioms themselves are based on an irrational choice or an irrational event of some sort or whatever, then the
Oh,
whole
well, I mean,
system
they're
becomes
not based
irrational.
upon other inferences, but I mean, I thought the whole point is that one distinguishes what's irrational from what's irrational, right? I mean, one isn't claiming that those axioms contradict each other, are we? Or that the inferences contradict the axioms, or that the axioms themselves are inconsistent with whatever set of inference rules one has taken to be basic, like modus ponens or whatnot. If that was the case, then you could charge that it's being irrational. Not sure how you can make the identification with irrationality and irrationality. That seems like a much more surprising identification to make.
Yeah, I don't understand how my clarification there isn't getting through. The irrationality of something releases it from truth functionality, and if it's not truth functional, it's not meaningful, and if it's not meaningful, there's no reason to suspect that it is a sufficient reason for any belief.
I don't the factional to it being non-truth functional. I mean, I don't. What's are you just saying it's not a truth apt proposition in the case where it's on an irrational basis? And if so, what's the argument for that?
Because the basis for the beliefs is found in the axioms, and the axioms are taken on irrational grounds. So that means the entire belief set stands or falls with whether or not that irrational ground is sufficient.
Did you understand my question?
Yeah, I believe I answered it. You were looking for the reason why irrationality entails uh,
But don't you
irrationality.
but don't you think that truth aptitude is a property of propositions, right? And so, insofar as if you believe what I uttered was a proposition, then it follows that you believe that what I said was truth apt. So it seems like you're just contradicting that view, unless you believe that not all propositions are truth apt or something like that.
No, I think what you're saying is perfectly true for that. The reason I can believe that, the reason it's rational for me to believe that, is because I have an epistemology which isn't incoherent like yours. But with your epistemology,
Well,
because you
what's
base everything,
incoherent?
yeah, I mean that's what I was explaining before is, yeah, from irrationality, basically irrationality comes. There's attributing uh, rational beliefs from something that is not, uh, uh, which occur on grounds of something that is not, is irrational.
I don't see how that follows, right? Just because, are you arguing that the norms I posit for being the foundation of rationality are inconsistent with themselves, which would be, on my definition, irrational? I mean, I don't understand what you're arguing, because I never made the claim, right? My epistemology doesn't have the axiom that you seem to think that my epistemology does, which is that if something is irrational, it's irrational, right? So that's not part of that's not an axiom that I hold. And so to point out that the foundation is irrational is not to show an incoherence with my axioms.
Your belief in the axioms, is that inferred from them?
No,
Okay, there you go.
I don't understand.
No, but I mean that gets back to this charge of like I'm not sure. Like I mean, typically we like in the literature or wherever I don't know. We distinguish between what's irrational, something that isn't arrived at, say by some rational process or whatever, like some set of inference rules or whatever, versus what's irrational, where presumably one would follow an invalid inference rule or one would land up in a contradiction or other sorts of factors. And you don't seem to be claiming that what Josh is doing is um, following an invalid inference rule because he's not using an inference rule. If you're not using an inference rule, it can't be valid or invalid. I'm not sure if you've said that his axioms contradict each other in any fashion, at least not over and above this charge that in virtue of it being irrational, it's irrational. I'm not sure like how that holds precisely. So I think that's sort of what Josh is getting at when he's saying that just showing that all of my beliefs, let's say, stem from some set of basic beliefs, where those basic beliefs, in virtue of being basic, are not themselves based inferentially upon other beliefs, um, that itself means that his whole belief set is in some sense irrational, as opposed to stemming from something that's irrational.
Yeah, but what I'm pointing out is that to use your words there, the concept of something stemming from something irrational is irrational.
Why is that the
It
case,
is
though?
because it's a categorical error to expect rationality from non-rationality.
I mean, how is that
But
not just a
that's a
question?
different argument, though, isn't it? That sounds like something like an argument from reason. But I mean that's because I mean with the argument from reason, it's talking about like how non-rational processes, like how the cause-effect relation isn't the same as the ground-consequent relation, like in Lewis's argument. But you didn't seem to be giving that argument. You seem to be giving an argument that generalized against almost any standard account of foundationalism, the classical or modest foundationalism, right? Where one arrives at some set of beliefs which are not themselves justified by other beliefs by some inferential process. I'm not sure like how
I,
that wouldn't be just a subject to the type of argument you seem to be making here.
well, I wouldn't say I think most classical foundationalists hold to that. Like for example, if you look at Descartes, um, intuitions are taken to be innate, but they're not taken to be sourced at least for their justification or their rationality on things which are not themselves rational. It is precisely the nature of the mind as a rational entity, as an entity which is um, finds for its ontology a relationship to principles of reason, for which one is allowed to think that his intuitions are, in fact, rational. The
I mean,
others
is
are
that
obviously.
contradicting what Josh is saying? Because I mean, with Descartes, he's saying that he has certain clear and distinct ideas that he can sort of immediately see. Like he can clearly and distinctively perceive like the self-evident truth of something that 2 plus 2 equals 4, or that I exist, or so on and so forth. Is that in contradiction? I mean, even leaving aside this debate about classical foundationalism and other sorts of foundationalism, I'm not sure how that in and of itself is in contradiction with this view that one set of beliefs terminates in beliefs which are not themselves um, given a justification for in terms of, you know, being connected via inference to other beliefs.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. I mean, I didn't bring up the distinction between uh, moderate and stronger versions of foundationalism, but my issue is that if one is supporting one's belief system uh, on some state of affairs that is not itself uh, related in a way to rationality that is sufficient to bring about rational beliefs, then there's no reason to consider that belief rational. It would fails on its own, or it compromises its own system, because the system itself posits that we ought to have beliefs which comport to these axioms and which
So
are
then you
justified.
would,
Um, the point I want to make is that now, what I'm saying is irrationality is inconsistency. That is to say, there's some tension between some beliefs within this axiom set, right? There is, in fact, a tension between these beliefs. That's what it means for a belief to be inconsistent, right? There's like a contradiction somewhere in my belief set. That's what I take it to be. And so when you say that my belief is irrational, you're saying it's inconsistent with those beliefs for it to be irrational, right? But I didn't concede that um, because I never made the claim, right, that my belief is that irrational beliefs are inconsistent with the norms of rationality, right? I never made that claim. So you charging that, right, and claiming that that's true is not an argument. So the goal for you is to substantiate the claim that if your norms of rationality are themselves irrational, that's inconsistent with your norms of rationality. So a couple things you need to do this. You need to know all my norms of rationality, or at least one of my norms of rationality with which it being irrational is inconsistent, and you haven't done that. So those are the sufficient conditions. That's what you need to do.
Okay, well, I think the use of the word need there is interesting, but uh, as far as showing that entailed in an irrationally based philosophy is irrational beliefs, and that means irrationality. That to me is very simple. I think that I've already done it a few times, but my best
I think
attempt.
you're begging the question there consistently. Josh is distinguishing between irrationality and irrationality. The response just can't consist of
no, but
saying that to be
I
irrational is the same as being irrational.
no, I get what he's saying. Well, I think I get what he's saying, that if you're starting from a position of properly basic beliefs or basic beliefs, and you're basically saying that those aren't grounded in reasons, you don't have reasons for those, they're irrational, then nothing that follows from them can be rational. I think that's what he's arguing. I don't see how it follows, but I think that's what he's arguing.
Well,
It's not
but
the
again, the
argument is not.
distinction is between irrationality and irrationality. Josh just defined, or he clarified what he meant by irrationality as some type of inconsistency or contradiction, say, within the axioms, or between beliefs that are inferred from the axioms and the axioms themselves, or between beliefs that are inferred from the axioms and other beliefs that are inferred from other axioms or whatnot, right? That's what he's counting as being irrational, um, some sort of incoherence or contradiction or what have you. But that's very different from just saying that my beliefs terminate in some set of beliefs which are not themselves founded on the basis of inference from other beliefs. I'm not sure how that, in and of itself, results in a contradiction, or at least I think an argument or an extended argument of some sort would have to be given for that. Not just merely
Yeah,
claiming
I think
that irrational and irrational are one and the same.
I don't think that was my argument. I think it's a straw man. The argument is not that irrationality and irrationality are the same. The argument is that irrationality does not protect or entail rational results. It is accidental to rational beliefs, and so there's, in other words, one of your norms. If your system includes that you believe uh, these axioms and you have no justification for them, you have an irrational source for these axioms, then any belief is on the table because irrationality can provide for any belief. Oh, my stomach is full. I think I'll believe that these axioms are false. Oh, I have an itch in my ear. I think I'll believe that I don't exist. That's, yeah, well, that's exactly irrationality, because irrationality doesn't protect you from irrationality. This is the same mistake that people trying to defend against Plantinga's argument against naturalism make. They always strawman Plantinga, thinking that he is arguing that irrationality results from evolution, but that's not the argument. The argument is that evolution is not a reliable source for rational beliefs, and neither is any kind of irrationality.
I mean,
Well, I
I
mean,
didn't
we
make
want to
that. I didn't make.
distinguish.
Hold
Sorry,
on.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I didn't make that claim, right? So I don't see how it's showing an inconsistency in my worldview if I didn't make that claim, right? I don't think rocks are rational. I think rocks are non-rational, right? I don't think rocks are irrational, right? Nonetheless, I don't think rocks are inconsistent, right? So so in your view, right, if the irrational, right, somehow doesn't do any favors to rationality, that's fine. I don't see where I contested that, right? I agree that it's not the case that if something is irrational, um, then it's not rational, right? Like I don't understand how that's supposed to be an argument against my belief. I
Because
agree.
you take irrationality as being sufficient for having some beliefs, yes?
No,
Then why do you have some beliefs which are self-admittedly based on irrationality?
it doesn't. I don't think that it's a sufficient condition, right? Just because it happens to be a property of some beliefs, I don't think it's a sufficient condition for those
Oh,
beliefs.
okay. Then maybe I wasn't clear with my question before, but that's exactly when I was asking you earlier about um, when I was asking you whether or not you had an inferential basis to provide for the claim that rationality is the project that seeks inferential bases, and you said that you didn't have an account for that belief. That's exactly what I was asking for. I was asking for a sufficient reason why one should believe that.
I just said I don't have a reason for someone to believe that that's the project of rationality, right? Is to be consistent with these epistemic norms. I conceded that I don't have a reason that would motivate someone to be consistent with those, right? For
That is the
instance,
definition of arbitrariness,
I mean,
as relevant to this,
I don't see how that's arbitrary.
because you're believing something without sufficient reason to believe it. And if you believe that, and if that's the basis of your system, namely a belief you have for no sufficient reason provided, then all of your beliefs fall down to this one belief of, I believe this for no reason that I can provide.
I just want to
Real quick.
clarify that I just want to clarify that I'm a coherentist, right? So I just am adopting the basic belief language for the sake of argument because I think it still has use in the coherentist epistemology. That's just I want to make that clear.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think I understood you weren't a foundationalist. The no. So I was asking a more general problem. What I would ask now is, well, what system of epistemology considers causes of belief outside of justification? I've never heard of that. I've heard of externalistic justifications. I've never heard of a system that talks about causes that have absolutely nothing to do with our belief set about uh, originality and causality being connected to justification.
I'm not sure if I said anything that strong, or Josh said anything that strong. I think when Josh was talking about irrationality, I mean, I understood him to just be referring to that there are beliefs that one has that aren't irrational in the sense that they violate the norms of rationality, but they're not rational in the sense that they follow from some set of inferences according to the norms of rationality from other beliefs, right? That's a distinct question from asking then, of the basic beliefs one does in fact have, what are the causes, in this case, presumably cause in the non-rational sense of cause, in the what Lewis calls the cause-effect relation as opposed to the ground-consequent relation of those beliefs, right? So someone like Plantinga would say, well, the causes of your beliefs there are because, God endowed you with cognitive faculties that follow some sort of design plan, et cetera, et cetera. Some type of reliabilist like Goldman might appeal to an evolutionary account. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of accounts as to how one's beliefs are generated in that fashion. And I'm taking that whole debate to be distinct from this question as to whether or not one's beliefs do terminate in, say, this set of beliefs that are not themselves irrational insofar as contradicting the norms of rationality, nor are they themselves inferred on the basis of other beliefs.
Yeah, I guess I would tend to disagree with that. I think the distinction is not being made between debating the principles of either cause or justification for a given epistemology versus debating epistemologies. Since the epistemology as a whole is the very thing in question, my question about a sufficient reason for Josh's belief, or the word he used was inferential basis, um, was not exclusive to causes. Neither does it demand a cause. But I simply used what Josh gave me, and that was the admission that A, he doesn't have an account, not explicitly at least, um, as to why, as to an inferential basis for these axioms, and B, the the uh, the source of those beliefs, or we use the word the occurrence of those beliefs is irrational. The problem being then, well, if irrationality is a principle that your philosophy accepts, it concedes irrational beliefs as acceptable, then one can believe, and by irrational beliefs, I don't mean that the belief themselves is a content irrational. I'm saying that the belief has behind it a reason or cause which is irrational, right? If one system allows for that sort of belief, then it allows for its contradiction. That is a self-referential error, and any such system then is, by its own standards, meaningless. It's not intelligible. I said that all of that is just, I basically summed it up. I said all that is just to say, um, while you can debate the concept of causality apart from justification or warrant or some other placeholder for um, the sufficient normative causes for a belief, it's probably unwise to do so. It's not conducive to a debate about epistemologies as a whole.